Yeah, I was just testing. So all good. Next. All right. Thanks everybody for being patient. I'm sorry. Yeah, so welcome to workshop 2 of WiDS Datathon. Work- Welcome to workshop 2 of our today's Datathon session. So we will start by a keynote, right? And this is going to be done by our one Dr. Wambui Musura, who is a wellness manager at Britam Health, right? So Dr. Wambui is passionate medical doctor with a master's in public health, championing equitable access to quality healthcare through advocacy for impactful health choices. Sorry, health policies. I was checking on the person. Please mute yourself. You are this. Please mute yourself. Wangari, please mute yourself. I just managed to mute her. Okay. So our keynote is going to be by Dr. Wambui Mutura, who is Samuel, please, who is passionate medical doctor with a master's in public health, championing equitable access to quality healthcare through advocacy for impactful health policies. She's specialized in preventive and promotive health, dedicated to health equity and health system strengthening. Currently, she's working as a wellness manager at Britam, merging public and private sector expertise to contribute to a healthier and happier world, right? Over to you, Dr. Wambui. So I'll just take 1 second to share Dr. Wambui's screen. And yeah, the mic is. Karibu sana. The people who are here, please raise questions. It's all people.
All right. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yeah. Dr. Wambo is my name, as rightly introduced. I'm happy to be back. I was here last year and I have some familiar faces who I'm very happy to see. So today, it looks like health is a trending thing because we did have a health topic last year and this year, which is a good thing. At least this year it's geared towards more of mental health. So today, my talk is on ADHD in women, and the topic is on the overlooked role of hormones in diagnosis gaps. So it's going to be a little bit of a technical talk with a little bit of jargon in terms of neuroscience and brain health generally, but I hope it's going to bring the message home on how and assist you in running the project as you go along. So I'll start with a quote by Ivan Pavlov. So Ivan Pavlov was a psychologist or psychiatrist, but he was among the pioneers in psychiatry. And he said that if we could look through the skull into the brain of a consciously thinking person, and if the place of optimal excitability were luminous, then we should see playing over the cerebral surface a bright spot with fantastic waving borders, constantly fluctuating in size and form, surrounded by darkness, more or less deep, covering the rest of the hemisphere. So basically, it's just to show you a little bit of how complex neuroscience can be. So it's an area of research, continuing research. A lot of work is still being done. So a lot of some of the things I'm going to talk about here would be very new and emerging trends, but I hope that it's going to really drive the message home even as we move on. So all right. So, well, this should be an outline. So, but basically, we'll start with some definition. Then we'll look at what neuropsychiatric disorders are. Then we'll do a very little bit of the structure of the brain so that you also understand where some of these things are coming from. Then we'll look at sex differences in the brain microstructure among males and females, what has been shown. Then we look at also the hormonal influences on brain health. Finally, we look at ADHD, which is the main topic of the day and main topic of your project. And then we'll have a very brief Q&A session. So basically, I like starting the presentation with what health is. So health, as we say, is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Remember, the aspects of physical have to be there, mental and social well-being. So you can maybe reflect and see whether you are healthy, whether your aspects of physical, mental, and social well-being are where they are supposed to be. And mental health is a state of mental well-being that enables people to cope with stresses of life, realize their abilities, learn well, and work well, and contribute to their community. So for you to say you're healthy mentally, there are several aspects as highlighted here that you should be able to cope with stresses of life, realize your abilities, learn well, and work well, while positively contributing to the community. So then, what are neuropsychiatric disorders? So neuropsychiatric disorders, there are two words in this. That is neuro, that is neurology, that would stand for neurology, and psychiatry. So neurology basically focuses on the motor and sensory functions, while psychiatry is about behavior, mood, thought, and affect. So these two, when merged, that is when they bring in the aspect of neuropsychiatric disorders. So motor functions would be the movement, sensory would be the feeling. So that is what neurology focuses on. Then psychiatry now looks at the aspects of that are guided by the neurological aspects of behavior, mood, thought, and affect. And all, when we say someone, there's a psychiatric disorder or a mental health disorder, we will base this on the definition of the psychiatry itself, that it has to be a disturbance of mood, thoughts, and affect for it to qualify as a psychiatric disorder, all those three aspects. And of course, the examples are what we all know quite a bit about, the aspects of depression, there's anxiety, there's things around bipolar disorders. These are things that you've heard of. Schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is where these people you see in the streets collecting rubbish, or they're maybe insulting people. That is what schizophrenia is. Then that is what a lot of people know as mental health disorder. ADHD is what we are talking about. Substance abuse would be things around drug, alcohol abuse. OCD is what people talk about when obsessive compulsive disorder. This is mostly we see when someone is very clean and people assume they have OCD, which is not right. Then panic disorder, then bipolar, you are aware of bipolar, right? It's a mood disorder where you have aspects of depression, that is when your mood is really low, or what we call mania, when your mood really goes high and it's abnormally high. So yeah, so this little guy over here is your brain. So this is how your brain looks like. It's just one side of your brain, so either right or the left. So for people who are right-sided, it's sort of your dominant hemisphere sort of tends to be the left, and vice versa. So the anatomy of the brain is a bit complex. I'll just highlight what is important for us today. So basically, your brain develops from down up. So when you're born, there are some parts of this brain that have not developed, that are usually continue developing. And as you can imagine, what is for you, for a child, what is really important for them would be when once they're born, Their heart should work, their lung should work, what we call autonomic functions, things that work when you don't really have control. Like right now, are you controlling your breathing? It's just automatic, right? Your heart is beating automatically. Your lungs, all these things, there are things that are working automatically. And that the main function usually comes in from the cursor. This the lower part. This is what we call the reptilian brain, or the older brain. Yeah. So by the time a child is being born, this part of the brain usually has developed. And why we say this is because it controls the functions that occur, the functions in the body that occur without our control, basically. So that is this is the spinal cord. That is what we know as the spinal cord. Then there's the medulla. This is where the brain starts from, the pons and the brain and the midbrain. So this whole component here forms the what we call the brainstem. Then this is the cerebellum. Cerebellum is responsible for balance in your body. There's an something small here called an optic chiasm. So this one is for sight. Then there's hypothalamus and pituitary. These you might remember from maybe high school, but it controls, it's for hormonal regulation. Huh? Then what is important for us here today would be the areas that are shaded. Why? Because what you're talking about, that is ADHD. The disorder will be seen in a bit of these areas. So the first area we're starting with is the occipital lobe. Occipital ni nyuma, it's at the back, and that is responsible for sight. So this is where your sight is controlled from. Then when you move from the back here, then there's an area here we call the parietal lobe. So parietal lobe basically is just, it's responsible for your orientation, or it helps you know where you are in the environment, your position. That is the role of the parietal lobe. Frontal lobe is the main lobe, and one is for intelligence, cognitive function, learning. This is where a lot of that function lies. Limbic lobe is for emotions. So I think there are people, I don't know whether you've had a joke about you having an overactive limbic lobe when people want to tell you that you're being emotional, but this is what they usually mean. Corpus callosum, not really very important. It just helps to relay information between the two hemispheres of the brain, that is the right and the left hemisphere. So remember, frontal lobe is for cognition. There is a lobe at the side here that is not being displayed. That is on this side. The way the image looks like, it's not able to display that, and that is it's called the temporal lobe around the ear, and that is for one is for hearing, what you call the auditory function, and two for memory. So that is where visual memory is stored in this area, but we also have another part of the brain that is not displayed here called the basal ganglia, that also assists in memory. But remember this, so you have an idea of how the brain looks like, how the brain works, so that now you also are able to understand how now ADHD comes in, or whatever you're going to tackle in the next few slides. All right. So then we look at sex differences in the brain microstructure, and here, how for you to, you see, for us to try and investigate exactly how the human brain looks like, we really have to go deep. We really have to look at the cells. So what I've shown you here is just the superficial, like what we see on top. But for us to actually know the functioning, we really have to go deep into trying to investigate exactly how things happen in this brain. So in humans, it is not allowed for us to like cut out someone's brain or look at someone's brain when it's actually functioning like and it's not even possible, because how are you going to investigate someone's brain? But this has been done in mice, which are used as the research animals, and several things have been shown. So for here, this what I'm talking about here, what I'm showing here for humans is on the way it's been investigated is using an MRI. You all know an MRI, right? So an MRI is an imaging modality of the brain. There is a way an MRI can be structured whereby we call it a diffusional MRI or a functional MRI, whereby we use this as a form to investigate how the actual brain cells are working in this regard. So how this happens is what we through diffusion, and with this is where sort of we look at, so in the cell, you all remember the cell, right? You'll remember the cell. There was a inside the cell, what we are calling the intracellular space, and outside the cell, what we are calling as the extracellular space. So for us to investigate these, and for how the diffusional MRI investigates this, is it looks at within the cells, the way the molecules that are within the cell. You remember diffusion? Diffusion was movement from what high concentration to like high concentration to low concentration, right? So there is a way when cells are different, there is a way some cells can be oriented, like when they take in something or based on how they work, the cells, the way the water molecules in these cells move may be different. So there is where the cells can move in like one direction. That is the isotropic, what you call the isotropic diffusion. You don't really have to understand, but I want to bring in the aspect of how do we tell these differences in the cell microstructure in the brain. So there are some cells that you'll notice once they are investigated, then the water molecules within these cells are moving in one direction. And there are some that are moving in haphazard directions or different directions. So that is what we use the MRI to investigate, right? So, and this is what has been used to show us the differences in the cell microstructure between females and males. So what this has shown, this imaging modality has shown that in the regional gray matter, which is what is associated with most of the mental health disorders, and the gray matter, again, we go back to the brain, mostly would be these areas, yeah? So in that area, the gray matter, it has been shown to vary with sex. So there is a way that sometimes the frontal cortex of a lady and a gentleman, they are different. So this difference then also now predisposes them to what we are calling as the neuropsychiatric disorders. You remember what we defined as the neuropsychiatric disorders. So, and this varying is why how we see the extent of these disorders like depression, anxiety, ADHD, the symptoms tend to be different, because remember, the way at the lowest level, the way this brain structure looks for these people is different, right? So you get where the difference comes in, yeah? And we use, what you said is we're using the diffusional MRI to investigate as one of the modalities. Then another very important aspect of brain health is the hormones. So of course, women are the ones who have a lot of hormonal fluctuations during their lives, right? So during adolescence, during the menstrual cycle, during with contraception, pregnancy, menopause, all these different periods of someone's life are characterized by different levels of hormones, right? So when, like, let's say, we say, like, for men, which hormone is very dominant during adolescence? Boys, testosterone, right? For during the pregnancy, which hormone is very dominant? It's progesterone. It's progesterone. So pregnancy, progesterone goes up because it helps to maintain that pregnancy. During menstruation, around the ovulation period, your estrogen is really high. Menopause, what happens? Which hormones reduce significantly? It's estrogen, yes, because estrogen is usually responsible for menstruation. So menopause means the end of menstruation. So that means the hormone that regulates this has gone down. Sawa sawa. So a research has been done, and one thing that was shown, like, for example, I took an example of menopause here. So when women go through menopause, it has been shown that menopause itself, and that the hormonal influence, triggers the brain area responsible for memory and cognition, and therefore it predisposes them to neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. You know, Alzheimer's is a disease of forgetting, right? Yes. So that means the area in your brain that is responsible for memory has been affected. And is there anyone who can remember which area I said from the brain? Which area I said is responsible for memory or cognition? Millicent might have a gift for you if you remember. What cognition? You know the answer. Frontal lobe, yeah. And memory, we said the lobe that is not being seen here, that is a temporal lobe. All right. So you've gotten where some aspects of hormones come in, right? All right. So we move to the main topic of the day, which is ADHD. So all of you know what ADHD is, or you don't? Is there someone who's not very clear, or at least ADHD, you know, it means attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So if you're given this as a topic and you are asked to describe or to give symptoms of a child with ADHD, would you fail to get at least 1 mark? What would you say? This child might have what? Can't pay attention. They can't pay attention because, of course, there is a deficit in attention and they are hyperactive. Yes. So ADHD is a developmental disorder, and it's usually characterized by 3 things: inattention, that is sorry. So inattention, that is lack of attention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. So these are the kids. Well, I don't know whether you've ever seen that joke where a kid is very jumpy and they are distractive. They are referred to as having ADHD, which is not correct. But basically, these symptoms start in childhood and usually continues to teen and adulthood. So that's why we are saying it's a developmental disorder. Developmental disorders always start from childhood going up. So yes, so this is a bit of research that has been done on how the brain in ADHD patients usually looks like. Yeah. So one is what we call a reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex. So prefrontal cortex, remember, prefrontal cortex is what we refer to. So let me just go back here a little bit. Prefrontal cortex is the frontal lobe, basically. Remember, this frontal lobe, we said it's for cognition, intelligence. It helps you not, like the way what regulates your behavior. Like right now, you can start stripping over here or start screaming over here. So what regulates that for you would be the frontal lobe. Yeah. So in people who have ADHD, you can almost guess that has to have a problem, right? Because that is where it's a disorder of cognition. So one of the things here that we see is a reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex. Of course, with reduced activities, then that means there's it results in difficulty sustaining attention. That child it's inattentive. They're not able to control their impulses, and they are a bit disorganized. That is where the symptomatology comes in. The other one that has been shown here, remember, is through the diffusion MRI, that is a functional MRI, is one what you call, so default mode network basically is when, like right now, okay, it could be you are focusing on the screen, but when you're not at engaged in an active task, yeah, the way your brain is at right now, it's what you call at default mode, a default mode network. Sawa sawa. So what happens in children with ADHD, where their default mode is excessively activated? So meaning that they can't sit still. You're able to sit still because there is a level, your brain is operating at a certain level, yeah? But in ADHD, their brain is continually activated. So when your brain is continually activated, the brain influences your behavior, it influences your thoughts, everything, yeah? So you see this child will not be able to sit still. So that is why the hyperactivity aspect comes in. Then again, there is dopamine is your feel-good hormone, right? We all know dopamine is your feel-good hormone, yeah? So what happens if your feel-good hormone there's a dysregulation or there's a deficiency? That means you're not very happy, your mood is not the best. Sawa sawa. You're not motivated. your attention is not there. So in ADHD, children with ADHD, it has been shown that there's a dysregulation in their feel-good hormone. So you see, it's usually a constellation of things. Yeah, a lot of things are happening in the brain for them to present the symptoms that we see. Then lastly, there's an aspect of what we call theta and beta waves. So the EEG is the EEG in a long form is called the electroencephalogram. Yeah, great. See, someone has done their research. So the EEG is what we use to investigate the brain waves. Yeah. So basically, when we do an EEG, there are two types of waves we see, what we call the theta waves and the beta waves. Sawa sawa. So theta waves here, as highlighted, they are linked to daydreaming and inattention. Then beta waves are linked to focus and active thinking. So based on what you said as the symptoms of ADHD, then have you seen why then from the EEG studies, then we see an increase in the theta waves, which we should expect to be low, and a reduced beta waves. So that is why their focus is not really the best. That is why they tend to have a lot of inattention and daydreaming and are usually jump from task to task. So that is how the brain of children with ADHD looks like from the research. But of course, a lot of work is still going on in this area. So we are going to see a lot more of these things in the future. So then, what makes the difference in ADHD between males and females? Because of course, I think that was among the main research questions of why ADHD has been largely undiagnosed. So one, we look at the feature, then we look at the differences between males and females. So one is on the prefrontal cortex. You remember what you talked about the prefrontal cortex, right? At this point, kuna mtu hajaelewa prefrontal cortex ni gani? I've taught you brain anatomy in a very short while. So the prefrontal cortex is in what color? What color? Yeah. Yes. In ADHD, this is our main focus area, yeah? Cognition, attention, this is controlling of impulses, and of course, a bit of the memory cortex. So for the prefrontal cortex in males, it tends to be smaller and matures later, leading to more hyperactivity and impulsive behavior. You remember we said that part of the upper part of the brain develops after the baby is born. Sawa sawa. The baby is not born with that part of the brain, or it's largely undeveloped. So as we go along, research has shown that for males, the prefrontal cortex matures, and it's usually smaller and matures a bit later. So you see why that brings in a difference in terms of the symptoms. So of course, the boy child who doesn't have a very well matured prefrontal cortex, that is why we see a lot of hyperactivity and impulsive behavior in them. So for female, it's affected a bit differently. I think the maturation is a bit faster for them. That's why you tend to see that some of these symptoms are a bit different. Then the basal ganglia had highlighted it a little bit earlier. So usually it helps regulate movement and impulse control, basically. So it tends to be smaller in males with ADHD than neurotypical males. So that is why there is a dysregulation in movement and also a dysregulation in impulses in this aspect. Then there is also, remember what we called the default mode network, right? So that is how your brain is operating at optimal. Right now, you're not engaged in an active task. So in males, we've seen that there are more disruption in the default mode network, leading to hyperactivity, impulsivity, and difficulty switching between tasks. That is in males. In females, the disruptions are a bit subtle. So why then this leads to a difference in the symptoms in these patients, where we see a lot of anxiety and inattentiveness. So that is how typically, this is how ADHD presents in females. And as we'll see as I complete this presentation, has presented as one of the main diagnostic challenges in this. Remember, when I was defining ADHD, I told you is a disorder of three things. Yes, hyperactivity, one, inattention, and impulsivity, right? So you see, these symptoms are very typical in males. You can see males here have hyperactivity, have impulsivity. So as a doctor, you're quicker to diagnose a male child with ADHD because their symptoms are very typical. It's like the way you know how malaria looks like. Cindy, you know when you sweat a lot, when you have fever, and you've recently traveled from Kisumu, you can almost, even you yourself can diagnose yourself that you have malaria. Cindy, but imagine you've been in Kiambu and you just feel fatigued. Well, what I think would you have? Just fatigue, maybe a little bit of fever. Would you be quick to think that this is malaria? No, you'd not. So that is the same situation that happens in ADHD. So the symptoms in males and females, males is very typical of what we have in our minds as what ADHD looks like, but in females is a bit different, and that is where the problem comes in. So, and finally, why do we say ADHD is more undiagnosed in women? One, we've said what we've just said right now. Males exhibit the typical symptoms, that is the hyperactivity and whatever. Then females, and females have the inattentive symptoms, that is, and inattentiveness can also look like anxiety, shyness, daydreaming. So you see, when a baby presents to a doctor with these symptoms, they are more likely to be diagnosed with anxiety as opposed to ADHD. No one would really think of going back to see what other things could be ailing this child, because what they're showing us is what looks like anxiety. Then lastly, for females is on the hormonal influences and mostly estrogen. So estrogen has been shown to modulate dopamine. You remember we said dopamine is a feel-good hormone, right? And the feel-good hormone in ADHD, is it high or low? The feel-good hormone in ADHD, is it high or low? Think about it. It's low, right? It should be low. Should be low. You see, you're not motivated. Like ADHD has an issue with motivation, and you need the feel-good hormone to be motivated, to be your best self. So what happens in females, and you remember we said females are the only ones who have, except maybe the testosterone surge in adolescents, males don't really have a lot of cyclic changes in their hormones, Indio. But females do have, like during ovulation, your estrogen goes up, right? So what does that mean? Your dopamine is up, Indio. It goes up. So that would mean your symptoms for ADHD, this child, if they were presenting with symptoms of ADHD, every month when they're ovulating, their symptoms are masked. Yeah. Sindio? Zinikama zinapotea. Sawa sawa. But remember now, during menstruation, estrogen goes down. So that means even dopamine goes down. So that means the symptoms come back up. So you see, it's cyclic. Yeah? It's cyclic. Mara inaenda juu, ingine inaenda chini. And even in pregnancy, we said estrogen goes down, menopause estrogen goes down. So that means lower estrogen, and that's what I wrote here. Lower estrogen, weaker dopamine. Sawa sawa. So that means the symptoms are more pronounced. Higher estrogen, better dopamine function, and the ADHD symptoms are fewer. So that with that cyclic changes, remember the boy is presenting with very typical symptoms, and they are very consistent. There is never a time they'll come to the there's never a time they'll come to the clinic and their levels or their symptoms have changed. The mother will always say that. But anyway, I've finished at this point. But you've gotten, yeah. So you've gotten why it's more difficult to diagnose with the research that is currently there. Of course, it's an ongoing work as we go along. But with what we have right now, these are the challenges that we are seeing in diagnosing of ADHD, especially. That brings me to the end of my presentation. It's a very quick talk on brain health and neuroscience. I hope you've been able to get something. I hope the message is home. It has not been very complex. I think last year's topic was a bit easier, but I hope you're good. You've gotten? Okay. All right. So any quick question before I welcome? Any quick question? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Paris. I had talked to someone about this, but they had said that it's illegal to medicate ADHD in Kenya. Then how do you assist people with ADHD?
No. They're usually given drugs. They can be seen as long as they are being given from a healthcare provider, like it's a psychiatrist who's prescribed that medication. It's not illegal. What would probably be self-prescription? Of course, drugs for all these mental health disorders are highly controlled because they can also become drugs of abuse. So that is the only way that can be taken care of.
Even for me, when I presented to our director, you remember she gave us the opening remarks on the first day, and she was like, I almost refused to do the opening remarks because this is something that is unethical to do. So I think I totally agree with her about her question, because I almost asked the same question. But yeah, if
Illegal, like when what do you mean? Like me, you diagnosing someone or a healthcare practitioner? No. I do know quite a bit of psychiatrists who've prescribed the drug. Yes. You can. Why would it be illegal? I'm a,
I mean,
what reason did they give? That's the first time I'm hearing.
they just said that it's not allowed in Kenya, something like that, because I wanted to get advice on that because I was diagnosed with ADHD in 2022. So I've been trying to cope with, I self-medicate using caffeine, which helps with sedation, but also behavioral practices, such things. So when she told me that, I just decided to just stop going into the medication mode. Yeah. So
Is she a therapist or a psychiatrist?
yeah.
They're a psychiatrist. And they said it's illegal.
They said they don't provide medication.
Well, is interesting. For sure, if you go to Chiromo or wherever or to a psychiatrist and they usually they have a diagnostic criteria and they diagnose that, they'll definitely put you on medication. And why I'm even saying this, it's very, what has been there is a challenge in diagnosing. It's very, for you, for even a psychiatrist to confident. Of course, some psychiatrists can confidently say this is ADHD, but before they actually tell you that your child has ADHD, they must have rolled out everything else. And I was recently in a conference on mental health last year by Chiromo Hospital Group, and there's a panel discussion on survivors or people who are living with mental health conditions. And there was one gentleman who was I think he's like 29. And Dr. Jenga, who is the CEO of Chiromo, had just recently, 1 year ago, diagnosed him with ADHD. So he'd lived all his life with all these things that we've seen here, and he never used to understand. Like, he never used to understand why is he different from other people. So at that point, when he consulted with that doctor, that's when that doctor was able to diagnose them with ADHD, and now they are on treatment, and they were saying that they were really doing much better than they were before. So it's not illegal. I don't know where that school of thought is coming from. So you should probably, of course, it's good that you're able to control it, but it would also be good to also talk to a therapist if the behavioral things are working. Of course, caffeine is not the best thing to take, especially in excess. But if the behavioral aspects are working, then you could explore that and use that as your management, but still from a healthcare provider.
Um, Question is ADHD entirely a genetic disorder, or does technology play a part in triggering it? Like right now, there's so much going on. Okay, my name is Timothy. My question is ADHD entirely a genetic disorder, or does technology play a part in triggering it in the brain?
So, well, that's a bit of a dicey issue. So I'd not say technology. What I've seen and what I've been reading about would be trauma. So it's not entirely, and ADHD has not really been linked to genetics. So what has some of the research that has been done, and we cannot say it's conclusive, has shown that childhood trauma, have a large part to play in ADHD symptoms. Like when a child is exposed to trauma, remember this the part of the brain I told you that is developing after the child is born. So you see, it develops up to from the age 0 to around 8 years. So what the child is exposed to between 0 to 8 is usually very important, because that also contributes to how the brain wires itself. So if the child is continually traumatized and there's a lot of emotional issues, you see the way the emotions and the way electrical activity move within the brain will be very, very, very different. Sawa. So that's why we see even children who are traumatized in childhood have symptoms even in their adulthood, like as they go along. Like there's a child who's predisposed to substance abuse and you're wondering how comes, but remember is when their brain was developing at that point. So there is a chance that when children go through very traumatic events within these very early years, there's a way the brain can rewire. So you see, in that aspect, it's not really genetics. It's just something that's environmental. So that's why children upbringing is usually very important, especially at age 0 to 7. What they're exposed to at that point also affects how they develop even in their future. I hope there's more clarity right now. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, doctor. I mean, that was quite insightful. Thank you very much. Even myself, at first, I didn't know what ADHD is in full, leave alone what it means and stuff like that. So yeah, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation and all the insights. Let's appreciate Dr. Wamboye. Thank you very much. I wonder if we have some questions online. Guys online, if you have questions. Oh, they are appreciating the claps. Oh, it's not showing here, but I can see them here. Okay. So we are going to have our next session. So yeah, try project. So our next session. Yeah. Yeah, it's so wonderful to hear it from subject matter experts why we are focusing on brain health for women and not for the male. I think everything is clear because even for us as ambassadors, we were wondering why are they focusing only on women? Now we know. Or I don't know, we can try another. Uh, Present. Yeah. Um, can you see the screen? Those of us online.
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you for confirming. Thank you very much. So I'll hand it over to who is going to take us through the next session. Okay, so Lillian has prepared a tutorial for us. Now that we know everything, the whys and um, all the details that we need to know regarding the challenge. So Lillian has prepared a tutorial for us, and it's going to, help us a lot because you can borrow from her notebook. Yeah, as you'll be working on the challenge. I think it's going to be a good one. Kigo, you have something? Oh, it's very kidogo. Can we see clearly online? Like, is the font okay? Everything? I hope you won't be running at things, especially the packages. You've already run things now. Okay, all yours. Yeah, guys, let's appreciate Lillian as she's. I don't know if I do.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am very happy to be here today. Happy Valentine's. I'm happy to see that people actually showed up and you did not have a hot date somewhere, or you came with them here and then you'll go afterwards. So I'm really happy to see you guys, and I'm really happy to be doing this. It's not really a tutorial. We'll be learning together along. And
Okay. Sorry. We all don't know who Lillian is, right? And it is very important to know who Lillian is. So she is a senior data scientist. So so with a Bachelor of Degree in Computer Science from Strathmore University and a Master's degree in Analytics from the prestigious Georgia Institute of Technology, Lillian brings a unique blend of expertise to the table. Her passion, empowering organizations to, unblock the full potential of their data. She's a true advocate for steering organizations toward a data-driven approach, and she does it with finesse. Oh, sorry, with yeah, guys. One more time, let's appreciate Lillian. Thank you very much, Lillian, for doing this.
thank you so much. Yeah, that's all about me. So my name is Lilian Chapniano, as you've heard. I'm a data scientist and I love data. I love what you can find in data and the things you can discover and the things you can learn from data. So that's why I am here. It's actually my second time as well. I was here last year and I'm really happy to be invited again. I don't take it for granted. It's a privilege to teach and to learn with you guys. So I think we can dive along. As Dr. Wambui has introduced, this is a data set about ADHD, and we wanted to understand, is there a difference between how females possibly present the symptoms of ADHD as compared to males? And is there something in their brains or even in the data that can tell us this is a female who has ADHD? And from the things that she's presented, it's actually very clear from the data when you analyze it. I don't know if any of you have had the chance to look at it, but it's very clear that for females, it's a bit harder to actually diagnose ADHD. In as much as our data set actually has more females, they have lesser diagnosis. So we'll just start with the normal importing of libraries. So I'm not going to go into them, but I think if you're in the data science field, you'll probably understand the common libraries that you use, which is pandas for manipulating data. You have matplotlib and seaborn, which is for plotting. Okay. Yeah, it's back on clear. Yeah, so we have libraries for visualizing data, and then we have a lot of libraries for creating models, imputing, a lot of them from sklearn. So I'll share the notebook and you can go through them more and try to understand the different libraries. So the first thing you do is first to load your data set, and we had a categorical data set and a quantitative data set. So I first started with a trained data set, which is our training data. And that's the one I was looking at just to try and understand the data that we've been given. And we also have training solutions, which are the solutions from the training data set. So from the categorical data set, I think it was made up of, I'll just go down to, yeah, so the categorical data set has, oh, I'm so sorry. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yes. So we have around 10 columns for the categorical data set and 1,213 rows. That's the data set that we have for the categorical. Then for the quantitative data, we have 19 columns and the same number of rows, which is 1,213. And for the training solution, we have 3, which is it contains now the diagnosis. So it is the ADHD outcome, and then whether the sex is a female or a male, and the participant ID. So the participant ID is present in all the data sets because it's the one that you're going to use to join so that you understand for these particular symptoms, was this person a female or a male, and were they diagnosed with ADHD? And then now you can come and train your model so that it understands the different patterns that actually exist in data that can tell you whether someone has ADHD and whether they are a female or a male. So that's our data set. And before you do any modeling, actually in data science, you'll find that a very small amount of your time will be taken in modeling, but a bigger amount of your time will be taken in trying to understand your data and actually doing exploratory data analysis. And that's what we'll spend a bit of time there. And the first thing that I normally do is checking for missing values. Because if you have missing values in your data set and then you move along and build models with it, then it might not give you very correct information. And for missing values, you just gauge and see, are they too many such that if I even replace them with a particular value, I might not have a very good representative population, then you drop it. But if it's small, then you can come up with different ways of replacing these missing values, and we call it imputing in data science. I believe you all know that. So that's the first thing that I did. And I checked for missing values in the categorical data set, the quantitative, and the training solution. And I found that, yeah, here. So I found that for the quantitative, I believe, yeah, so quantitative, you'll see that we have 360 missing values for this particular variable. And there is another variable in the categorical, which is missing 11 values. 360 is a big number to have missing, especially if that variable is very important in terms of telling us whether someone has ADHD or not. So we need to come up with a way of imputing it. It's not too much because it's not like more than half of our rows. So it's 360, it's around maybe a quarter. So we'll just find a way of imputing it. And also for the categorical that's missing 11 values, that one will also impute, and we'll figure out a way of imputing. So these are just trying to look at our missing values. And then now we come into filling in those missing values. And to fill in the missing values for quantitative data. So quantitative data ideally just means it's numbers, right? So for you to fill in missing values of numbers, you have different methods you can use. So you can either use a mean, which is the average. You can use a median, which is the number in the middle, or you can even use a mode. Or you can even go a step further and actually do regression to predict what that missing value is. So what you'll do is you'll try and understand for any other participants in our data set who have similar characteristics as this person with this missing value, what is the number that is most probable that will fill it in. But ideally, the first thing that you want to do is you want to do a simple solution. So you don't want to do a regression. So you check your data and you see whether it's a normal distributed variable. And if it's normally distributed, then ideally it does not have skewness. And this means that it's not being pulled to the left or to the right. And I remember very correctly in the last WiDS we had a presenter who talked about skewness of data. And she said something that has always stuck with me. If you want to know whether a data is left skewed or right skewed, you look at your big toe on your foot. So for my left foot, if my big toe is on this side and your data looks like that, then it's left skewed. And if it's on my right toe and your data looks like that, it's right skewed. So it's something I've always remembered. If it's normally distributed, then it means you can use a mean or a median. Any can work. Because if it's skewed, then ideally it means you have some outliers and it will pull our mean. And therefore a mean is not very good. In that case, you'd rather use a median. For this particular one, I believe it was normally distributed. Yes. So it's this one, MRI track age at scan. So when you look at this graph, it's relatively normally distributed. And this is before imputing it. So in this case, we can either use a mean or a median, whichever can work. And in our case, I just used a mean. So I imputed with a mean, which is here. And then for the categorical variable, this one, I believe you have like two options, which is the mode, because for categorical variables, it's not like you can calculate it. So you can just look at the most appearing and you pick it to replace the missing values. And that's what I did here. I believe you can also do regression. And then now you can get a different variable as compared to using the mode. So that's the first thing I normally check, is just to check for missing values. Once we replaced, I confirmed that we now do not have any missing values. So you can see it's with the other one, with the other plot that we had. I don't know if it's moving. Wait a bit. Yeah, so with this one, you can see that we had a lot of yellows, which shows us the rows that have missing values. But now once we've done our imputation, we'll just have a clean plot whereby we do not have any missing values. And that means we can proceed on with further analysis of our data set. So once we have imputed the missing values, we move on to look at the distribution of our numerical variables, just to try and understand for the numerical variables we have in our data set, are they normally distributed or are they skewed to the left or to the right? And this is because if you have skewed data, it might actually affect your results with the model you choose. Some models are able to work with skewed data and it does not affect their performance, but some models can be affected by skewed data. And therefore, it's just checking such that when we choose our models eventually, and we can see the performance is not very good, then we can correct for the skewness and then run the model again and see whether there's an improvement in the performance of the model. So that's what I did here. I just checked for skewness for all the numerical variables. And I also just have a plot. And the plot, you can use the plot to check for skewness, but sometimes with a visual eye, you might not really know whether you are seeing the right thing or you're interpreting it correctly. So with the calculation, it's a bit easier. It's pretty clear whether data is skewed to the right or to the left. And so ideally, if our data is right skewed, then when you calculate skewness, you will find that it has a long right tail, and the skewness number that you calculate will be greater than 0. If it's negatively skewed, this means that it's left skewed, then it will have a long left tail, which means most of our data points actually lie to the left. It will have a negative skewness score. And if it's nearly 0 or approximately 0, then it means that our data is symmetrical and therefore it's a normal distribution, which is mostly what we want. But now when we look at our variables, we see that there are some variables which are positively skewed. And these are the variables. And it's just important to list them so that when we come to correct for this skewness, we already have these variables and we are not having to run the code again. So for right skewed data, there are different ways you can correct for it. And one of the common ones is a log transformation. So if you find that the performance of your model is not very good, and you've checked for skewness of your data, and you've actually found that some of the variables that affect the target variable are rightly skewed, then you'd want to correct for it by transforming it with a log transformation. Then if it's left skewed or negative skewness, then we can use power transformations, and power transformation just means a square root or just any power. So you can try different powers, but normally you just start with a square root, which is raising it to a half, I believe. And for the variables that are nearly normal, there's nothing you do to them because that's what we want, right? Then I combined our data sets because you remember we had categorical, we had quantitative, and we had the training solutions, but we had a common field, which is the participant ID. So we use that to combine our data sets or to merge them so that we have one whole data set. But then we will drop the participant ID because it's not adding any value in our analysis as of now. The value that it's adding to us is just identifying a particular row or a particular individual. But in terms of analysis, it's not adding any value, so we drop it. So we move on to understanding our categorical variables, because for the numerical variables, mostly it's just understanding the summary statistics, which I did, but I didn't really summarize it. So you can just look at the summary statistics of your numerical variables and also check for the distribution so that you can understand the distribution. And the summary statistic is very important because it tells you the range of your data. Data points for the numerical ones. And it's very important because when you come to modeling and the ranges of your different variables are not the same, then it affects the performance of your model. So what you want to do is you would want to scale your data so that they're in the same scale and in the same range so that you can have good performance on your model. So just look at summary statistics so that you can understand. You can look at the minimum, the maximum, the mean, the median, and it sort of tells you whether they lie in the same range or not, and what do you need to do. For categorical variables, what I was looking at here is just for each categorical variable, the distribution of whether someone was diagnosed with ADHD or not. And there were several variables. I'll just go to the summary that I did after doing all these plots. Yeah. So we have some biological factors. Wait, sorry. So the first thing that I looked at, even before looking at the categorical variables, is looking at our target variable and checking who are more diagnosed with ADHD. So either the males or the females. And as Dr. said, rightfully so, you'll see that more males, let's just wait for it to load. Yeah, so you'll see the males are actually the ones who are diagnosed with ADHD more as compared to females, right? And I was asking myself a few questions even before looking at the data. Why is it that males would be diagnosed with ADHD more as compared to females? And I think she answered most of the questions. And one of the key things that came out is that for males, you'll see that the things that are attributed to ADHD is things that are related to males or things that males tend to do. So for females, they tend to be very shy. They're not very impulsive. They're not risk takers. Or even society has sort of made them believe that that's how you're meant to act. So that's why you'll find that not a lot of females will be diagnosed with ADHD, in as much as they might have it, because you've been taught that you're not supposed to be hyperactive, or you're just a lot of things, like even being impulsive, taking risks. It's very frowned upon as compared to males. And I believe it's something that is used to diagnose ADHD. And therefore, if it's not seen in females, it's just assumed, okay, you don't have ADHD. So that's what I was just looking at it. And I've put in some notes here, so you'll just look at it. So now when we look at the categorical variables, so we have the enrollment here of study, and this is when the participants were enrolled into the study. And we see that a lot of people were enrolled in 2017, 2018, and 2019, but the highest is happening in 2018. I don't think it's the fact that a lot of people were diagnosed with ADHD. It might just be that people were now going a lot more to try and get a diagnosis, or there had been a bit more awareness in this study as compared to the previous years. Then for the study site, I think this is where participants were being checked for, or rather where they are going to be diagnosed. And study site 2 has very few cases. which might indicate possible regional variations in ADHD diagnosis. It does not necessarily mean that this study site does not have people with ADHD. It's just that maybe there's not enough awareness. So there's a lot of things that needs to be understood before you can actually come to the conclusion that in study site 2, people don't have ADHD. Whereas in study site 1 and 3, there's a significantly higher number of ADHD cases being diagnosed. Then we look at ethnicity, and we see that 0 is the one that has the highest number of ADHD diagnoses. And when you look at the data dictionary, I think as ethnicity 0 was either someone who's white or Caucasian. And again, it does not mean that these people are the ones who have ADHD. It might just mean that maybe they have the capability to actually go to hospital and take their kids to be diagnosed, whereas maybe Latinos, Black Americans, or any other race, they don't have that capability. And also awareness. You might find that these guys have more awareness as compared to people who are from a different ethnic background. Then there's race. And here I was wondering what's the difference between race and ethnicity, because I would think they're sort of the same. I don't know. Or they would carry the same information.
I think in the Kenyan context, when you think about ethnicity, you think about the cards. But no race, it's either white.
Yeah, so yeah, I think that's a good explanation, because ethnicity in Kenya would be maybe your tribe. But now all of us are Black, or rather, most of us are Black, because we have Indians who are Kenyans. So yeah, I think that's where the difference is. But these sort of lit a bulb in my head to think there are certain categorical variables here that might be carrying the same information. And that means there's just redundancy, and it's not important. It will affect your model performance. Then we also look at the MRI track scan location. And I also thought this might be the same as the study site. I don't know, maybe people are being scanned at a different place from the study site, or it might be at the same place where you're being studied again. So it just makes you think maybe there are some variables that are carrying the same information. But at the same time, it's also important to just think through that maybe for different locations, they have different equipments, different assessment methods, different resources, and maybe that's why study site 2 did not have a lot of ADHD cases, because they don't have enough resources to actually take in patients and diagnose them. So it just makes you think of the different things that can bring that. Then we now start looking at the education level of the parents to these kids. And something that was interesting is ADHD prevalence is observed in participants whose parents have higher education levels. So these are people who've gone to college and they've finished at least 1 year, they have a college education, or they have a graduate degree. And the possible explanation for this is maybe if you're more educated, it means that you have better income, better access to insurance, healthcare insurance, and therefore you can take your kids. If you see your kid is acting in a certain way, you'll say, you know what, let's go to hospital. Then they'll get diagnosed. Or it could also be something I found interesting is that they maybe have higher expectations on their kids because your parents are seeing themselves and what they've done for themselves, and they're wondering, why aren't you doing the same? So they take you to hospital because they think it's out of the norm. So that's another thing. And another thing can also be awareness. Because you're educated, you have access to resources, you're reading, you're speaking to people, and you're also not stressing about the basic needs. So you're almost at a different level in terms of how you're living. Then there was occupation, which I think is closely related to education, because the occupation you get, not always, but most times, is related to the education you have. And we found that people who have better jobs are the ones whose kids are being diagnosed with ADHD. And I'll just explain it the same way I've explained the education ones. Then there was also another education. I didn't understand this one as well. So I figured they must be related somehow. But for this particular one, an interesting pattern came up whereby we saw that parents who are homemakers or stay-at-home parents actually have kids who are being diagnosed with ADHD more. And the possible explanation for this is maybe you don't have a very good job, and therefore um, your kids don't even have a very good living environment. As Dr. said, trauma can bring up these symptoms. And it just means that maybe your parent is stressed, and sometimes when someone is stressed, they can even lash out. Some parents will whip their kids if you do something wrong. So it just comes with a lot because your parent is struggling with just the basic bare minimum things. And now also maybe you're acting out. So it just brings a lot of things that I thought might be the reason why these parents have kids who are being diagnosed with ADHD. Because when you look at that particular graph, that one stands out at the complete end. And then we have these parents who have better education at the other complete end, who also have kids being diagnosed with ADHD. Same for the occupation too. It's just the same, whereby we see people with better jobs. Yes, please.
um, to make you lose your thought trail. Of the parents who stay at home, could it also mean that maybe they have a lot of time to observe their kids?
Yeah, that's also a possibility, exactly. Because as for parents who are busy, then you might not even know your kid and even how they act out. So that's a very good explanation, which is a positive as compared to looking at it from the negative view. So it's a very good explanation because you'll find that if a mother is home with their kids or a father is home with their kids, you'll get to know your child more. You'll get to know their temperament, you'll get to know their personality. So I guess it's something to also consider. Yes. Yeah, so I found it very interesting to look at the categorical variables. Then now we looked at the correlation of the categorical variables. Just as I had discussed, we find that we have education 1, education 2, occupation 1, occupation 2. And I was asking myself, surely some of these variables should be related. And for categorical variables, the correlation calculation is not as straightforward as the correlation calculation for numerical variables. And for categorical variables, you use something called a chi-square test, whereby you first convert those categorical variables into a numerical variable, and then now you look at whether those variables are actually correlated. And it was interesting that I think all the variables were actually correlated, apart from, I think, 2 or 3. So all these variables, they look like they might be carrying the same information. And this is very important to note because when you're coming to look at your model and you're trying to improve its performance, then what you want to do is you want to get feature importance and get only the features which are adding value to your analysis. Then I also looked at the correlation of numerical variables, and this is pretty straightforward. You just use that .corr function, and it gives you a correlation matrix, and you can plot this. Shall just wait for it to load. Yeah, so it just gives you a very good visual of the correlation, and the darker the colors, the higher the correlation. And that's why you see a straight diagonal line, which is very dark, because it's 100% correlation to itself, because it's the same variable. So you have those variable on the x-axis and on the y-axis. So if it's the same variable, then ideally it is going to be dark because they're highly correlated. But then we are interested actually in the variables which it's not itself, but they're highly correlated, because it means then we can just use one of those variables. We don't need both of them. Then another thing I thought to do was to look at variables that are highly correlated with the outcome variable, which is the ADHD outcome. And the variables that I found were, they are not very highly correlated. So just give it a moment, it loads. Yeah. So you'll see the first one is ADHD outcome, which is the same, it's the same variables. That's why it has 100% correlation. But then, as you said it correctly, we see hyperactivity is also quite high at 55%. Externalizing, which is just outward expressions, is also very high. And difficulties and also generating impact. Then for these ones, I left them. And I wanted to see the difference for these particular variables between males and females. So that's what I did next. So it's just looking at the plots of these particular variables for females and males. And when you look at all of them, apart from generating impact, all of them, the males have a higher mean and a higher median as compared to females. Then this is still in line with what we have already found. So ideally, the key takeaways we see is that males show higher levels of hyperactivity, externalizing behaviors, and overall difficulties compared to females. Then females tend to have lower scores across all ADHD-related traits, except for the generating impact feature. And this aligns with research that has been done for ADHD, because males tend to be more hyperactive and they have externalizing behaviors as compared to females, who often actually go undiagnosed. So it's not that they don't have, it's maybe that they're undiagnosed or they have later diagnosis when you're an adult as compared to it being caught when you're a child. Right. And some of the implications is males may be diagnosed earlier due to visible hyperactivity and impulsivity, which is a good thing, because if you catch it early, it's probably a good thing as compared to it being caught at, say, 29 years old, as Dr. told us. And females may be diagnosed later or misdiagnosed, which is, I think, even worse, due to more subtle symptoms. So you're being treated for something that you don't have, and for whatever you have, you're not being treated. So it's affecting your day-to-day living. Then for the highly correlated features, we also see that there are highly correlated features in terms of the numerical variables, and we can see that externalizing is highly correlated to hyperactivity, which is still in line with what we found. Difficulties with externalizing, emotional problems with internalizing. I think this would be probably something that would be seen in females. So internalizing is not being able to express it. You keep it in, but you have emotional problems as compared to males. And maybe that's why males are said they're not very emotional. I don't know. Yeah, so we had quite a number of features which were highly correlated. And this is just something to note as well when you're coming now to do your analysis and selecting features that would probably help your model perform better. So in terms of feature importance, even before we start building our model, we looked at ANOVA and the chi-square test to try and get features which predict the outcome a bit better. And so we used ANOVA for the numerical variables and the chi-square test for the categorical variables. So ANOVA is just short for analysis of variance, and it's a statistical test that measures the relationship between numerical features and the categorical variable, and it helps determine whether the means of different groups are statistically different. And the groups here we are looking at are whether someone has ADHD or whether they do not, right? So it's very good in terms of helping us identify the variables that are important in terms of predicting whether someone has ADHD or not. And what we are looking at here is the p-value. If you've done statistics, you understand the p-value. So if it's less than 0.05, then it means the feature is highly statistically significant. So it's a good feature to use in terms of predicting ADHD outcome. So we got several features. And then for the chi-square test, it's just used to measure the association between categorical features and the categorical target variable. And it helps determine whether the presence of a certain feature influences the target outcome. And here we are looking at ADHD outcome and whether the sex is a female or a male. And as I said earlier, for categorical variables, we'll have to convert it first into numerical variables and then now compute chi-square statistic and check for the p-value. So if it's less than 0.05, then it means that that feature is highly important in terms of predicting the target outcome. So enough with the analysis. Now we move on to modeling. And when you do your modeling, it's always important maybe to choose around like 3 models that you start with. And you look at the different performance of these models and you keep fine tuning them. And eventually you choose a model that probably works better for your data. And for me, I chose logistic regression, random forest, and XGBoost. And when you look at those 3 different types of models, it's almost like you're increasing in complexity or in terms of the model being perceived as being a better model. Sometimes logistic regression is good, and it's always better to start with a simple model because even when you're working in the real world, then if a simple solution works, it's always better before you go to a complex solution. So that's why I started with logistic regression. And some of the reasons is that logistic regression is quite interpretable and explainable, which is very important when you're building your models. Because if you cannot explain something to top management, it's very hard for them to trust you and to believe your results and even have action being taken based on your results. So it's important to have explainable and interpretable models. Then it's very fast and efficient. It works very well with structured data, and it does not require a lot of computational power. And if you're working in a resource restrictive place, then it's a good thing to try before you do anything else. And it also handles multicollinearity. Then we have random forest, and this we move on top of logistic regression, and it's a bit better because it can handle nonlinear relationships, while logistic regression works better with linear relationships. Then it's robust to outliers, so it will not be affected if you have outliers in your data set. Then it has feature importance. Sometimes it's actually used to select the features that you'll use in your model, even if it's not that random forest. You can use it to choose the features that you will include in your model. And then it also handles missing values very well. So you don't even have to impute it with random forest, and it does not overfit. And overfitting here just means your model learns your data so much that it's almost like it's following the pattern of your data. But when you expose it to new data sets, then it doesn't perform well. And in the real world, you don't want that because you're working with real data that affect financial decisions, it affects people, and even in the medical field, it affects people's lives. So it's very important to make sure that your model is not overfitting. And finally, we have XGBoost. So this is a boosting algorithm. And why it's called that, it's because it improves the performance by sequentially correcting errors from previous models. So it will learn the errors that the previous model made and it will correct on it. And it's a very good model, and most times it performs very well. It's rare that you see XGBoost is not performing well. Then it handles imbalanced data very well. And imbalanced data here means when you have the target variable, one class is higher than the other. And this happens a lot in the real world, whereby like even in fraud, you'll have that a lot of cases are not fraud. So the data that you're using to train your model is actually imbalanced, which is something you need to treat for before you do any modeling. Because if you just move forward with imbalanced data, then it's not going to give you the correct outcome. Then it also does feature importance and selections, just like the random forest. And it also works very well with missing data. And it's faster than other boosting methods because it uses parallelization, where it trains several trees at the same time. So the first model I built was with the data as it was. So the only thing here is we had the missing values replaced. That's it. So I did that. And since we are looking here at a classification problem, then ideally the measures of performance would be accuracy, recall, precision. So all those classification metrics, that is what we will use. And we see here that the logistic regression is the one that's outperforming the rest. So I have summarized it here. So for accuracy, we see that logistic regression has 80%, random forest 79, and XGBoost is 78. Precision is also pretty high for all of them. Recall is also high. This is actually interesting because for all of them, they're performing not too bad as compared to what you'll see later. So this is the first model that I built. It's just imputing the missing values and fitting it to logistic regression, random forest, and XGBoost. So ideally here, if we were to go with this, we would go with logistic regression, I believe, yes. Because the difference in terms of recall, accuracy, precision, logistic regression is the one that's performing a bit better. And you remember that it's also a simple model, so it's interpretable, it's explainable. So it's going to be very easy for you to answer questions if any were asked. Then when we look at the secondary prediction, which is the sex of the participant, this is where we see a bit of a problem. You can see that for accuracy, they're not doing as well as compared to when we are trying to predict ADHD outcome. So the highest is 70%. And the one that is a bit of a concern is the recall. And the recall is just the ability of your model to actually pick out positive instances from all the possible positive instances in your data set. And it's a very important way of measuring performance because it it's not like accuracy, whereby accuracy can be affected if your data set is imbalanced. So sometimes it's important to look at recall. And when we look at random forest, in as much as it's doing very well with accuracy, it's doing horribly when we look at recall because it's at 13%. And this probably just makes us think we need to balance our data set. It's not something that we had looked at, but maybe our data set is actually imbalanced in terms of females versus males. So we need to treat it. And one of the ways that you can treat for an imbalanced data set is something called SMOT. So it's synthetic minority oversampling technique. So you pick the minority, which we don't have a lot of, and you create synthetic instances of the same so that your data set can understand what are the characteristics that show the minority, and therefore it's able to predict a bit better. So that's the first one. And there may be the reasons for the performance being low, especially in terms of predicting the sex, could be we did not do any feature scaling. So for the numerical variables, maybe the range is not very good. So we need to do scaling in terms of standardization so that the range is a bit similar. Then for the categorical variables, we did not do any encoding, which is important. So maybe if we do some encoding, then we'll have some better performance. Then there's also feature selection. We might have some redundant features or irrelevant features that we can drop and just use the ones that we actually need. So, and also handling class imbalance, because we can see that for predicting the sex of an individual, maybe there's some imbalanced distribution and we therefore need to treat it. So the next thing that I did is I scaled my data. So I used the standard scaler for the numerical variables and one hot encoding for the categorical variables. And then I fit my models once again. And just wait for it. But we'll see that logistic regression, again, is actually outperforming the rest when it comes to predicting the ADHD outcome. But when we look at predicting the sex, it's a bit better now when we look at recall. I think it's still loading because for logistic regression, it has improved to 40%, whereas the accuracy has improved to 68%. So logistic regression here looks like it's a good model to use because it's performing very well when it's predicting ADHD outcome. And even when you're looking at the secondary prediction here, where we are looking at whether someone is a female or a male, then it's not doing very badly. It's not good. We still need to do a bit of work on it, but at least it has improved. So it means the standardization and one hot encoding actually helped our model. Then the next thing I did is I remember that our data was skewed for some of the numerical variables, and I just corrected for the skewness. So for the right skewed features, I used log transformation. And then for the left skewed features, I used the square root. And after doing this, our models actually deteriorated, all of them. So their performance deteriorated. So it shows that skewness is not really affecting all our models, and therefore it's not a very important thing to do here. And therefore, moving forward, I did not actually carry it forward because with the standard scaling, I realized that this has improved the performance of our models, and therefore I decided that something that I'll carry along. So for skewness, it did not improve our performance. If anything, most of them deteriorated. So lastly, what I did is selecting important features. And for whatever we had done with ANOVA and the chi-square test, I selected those variables which were deemed important. And these variables were then scaled for the numerical ones. And for the categorical ones, I did one hot encoding because that also helped the performance. And then I checked our models once again. And there was some improvement, but when you look at the secondary prediction, it dropped. So it wasn't performing very, very well. So ideally, what we see here is maybe we can use all our variables to actually predict ADHD outcome and also the sex of someone without selecting particular features only. Because when we select features and reduce them, then we see that our models are not performing very well. And that's where I ended my analysis. But at the same time, the things that I would suggest if any of you are working on this project is to look at the imbalanced data set, because I actually checked later and I found that the data set is, I would call it highly imbalanced, because it's 69% females and I think around 20 what? 100%. Yeah, so the rest 31% were males. So it's highly imbalanced and therefore you need to correct for it. So I believe if you were to correct for this imbalanced class, then you will have a better performance. Another thing is you can hyperparameter tune random forest and XGBoost. And maybe by doing this, you'll actually get better performance for these two because ideally they always perform very well. So I don't know how logistic regression trumped them, but it's something that you can also look at. And then the other thing is you can do feature engineering where you can combine certain features to create new features, or you can even do a different type of feature selection, because here we were just looking at important features that might predict ADHD outcome. But at the same time, maybe those important features have multicollinearity. So ideally, they don't work very well together. So that's something else that you can explore. But for the time I had, this is the analysis I did. It was very interesting. And I really enjoyed it. And I hope you've learned something. So if you have any questions, I am ready to take them.
Oh, very much, Lillian. Thank you for the presentation, exploring the data to the model building and everything. I mean, it's amazing. Yeah, do we have questions for
Thank you.
Lillian? And probably after doing what you've recommended, sorting out multicollinearity if there is, and handling the imbalanced stuff, we would probably have a better result from what we are seeing with the logistic regression. Even me, I'm surprised. But yeah, let's see how it goes. So questions?
I wanted to ask, I'm Isaac. So according to the data you've shown, there's a data set that had connected matrices and it had 19K columns. So I was really wondering how important is it in predicting the ADHD outcome?
I also saw it. I didn't use it, to be honest, because of resources and also time constraints. I believe it must be important because it was scanning. It was something to do with the brain scans. So I believe they would be very important in terms of predicting ADHD, and considering how we have seen that the brain of a female is different as compared to the brain of a male. So I believe that this is a data set that can actually add a lot of value in terms of your analysis and improving your performance.
Okay, so can we say like maybe in terms of your analysis when your logistic regression performed better than all other models. But suppose we add the connected matrices, I believe XGBoost can learn these patterns more well than can perform better than logistic regression.
I would choose to believe so. Yes, because even for logistic regression, it's not able to actually catch those patterns. So I believe you can't even use logistic regression, or it will be trumped by these other types of models because it's not able to understand nonlinear relationship. So once you introduce that, then it's not going to be performing better. It's something that I will probably look at. I looked at it. I knew my machine cannot handle it. I won't be able to do it before the presentation day. So I came with this, but thank you for bringing it out. And I hope that everyone else who's doing the analysis has seen it and should try it because I believe it's very important. I don't think they would have given it to us if it's not. And especially the fact that it's actually details about the brain scan. Yes.
Yeah, for me is more of a comment. I like the process that you have walked us through before getting to the models, because that is a clear reflection of what happens in the industry. I think we have spent like 80% of our time on the EDA, which is the best practice, as a standard in the industry. And then I've also enjoyed, walking the journey from Daktari to you. It's like we have seen how data science is interpreting medicine, because quote unquote, Dr. Mbui almost preempted, your presentation. I think now from medicine to data science, we have seen the same thing, and the conclusion is the same, that the symptoms are more pronounced on males, given that our data is like 69% of female. And then on the EDA, we have seen that majority of the diagnosed cases are male, speaks to the same. So for me, it's been a great learning time. And I hope that you'll share the material with us to interact more with it. And then lastly, on the box plot, there's a variable that was the same for male and female. I think that is also a key insight. Is there anything that males and females share that you can't tell them apart? Maybe Daktari can help us on that. Thank you.
I think it's actually important to see what that generating impact is. Yeah. So it's generating impact.
Yeah, it's actually really true what Sam has said, moving from the knowledge getting and why in data science you just need that. I'm just trying to pass time, but she's looking for something. Yeah, it's really good to understand your data, and understanding your data, bringing in somebody who is the subject matter expert in that area is always really important. So, for example, what Daktari did prior to this presentation was so important. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments, Sam. I also really enjoyed it. And I think the thing that will probably differentiate the diagnosis would be that data set because it's brain scans. And as you've correctly said, the brains for women are wired differently from that of men. So that's where maybe better insights can be drawn. I would also want to look at it and see that. For the generating impact, so I've seen it in terms of the impact I believe both of them have on the society or something, because it's sort of a calculation of different different questions that parents were given. So it was a whole questionnaire, and then they come and pick several variables and calculate almost like an average, which is generating impact. So maybe it's just the impact that is exactly. Yeah, so I think it's the same, pretty much the same. Yeah.
Any other question? have we started working on the challenge?
At least Isaac has.
Yeah, like have we started? Okay, how many have started working on it? Oh yes, that's awesome. That someone has started. I believe, yeah, with this and you can expand. There is so much to explore as logistic relation with manufacturing and developing the data. So
Exactly.
let's go and explore more. Yeah, other models and stuff like that. See, let's see how it goes with the challenge.
Yeah.
And yeah. Do we have any other question? Because if we don't, then yeah. Okay, if you've started working on the yeah. No problem.
For the, right. Yeah, it's working. It's working. For the other data set, it has 19,900.
Yeah.
How do you analyze such a huge data set when you don't even know? I mean, we know that it's whatever neurons and all that, we know that, but how do you actually, analyze it? Do you okay? You want to answer?
Okay, so yeah, the data you can't analyze it using like pandas because you'll run out of memory issues. So what I will possibly do is use maybe PySpark, yeah, or Dask. You have Dask that analyzes huge data frames. It might come in handy.
Yeah. And I would also say you can chunk it up. Yeah. So you can do chunking and analyze it in chunks. Yeah. That's also a different thing that you can do. And aside from what he suggested, instead of doing it on your machine, you can use the libraries he suggested on a GPU. So you can use like Google because it will be able to handle it a bit better. In as much as those libraries are helping you, then the GPU is also helping you. So that's how I would look at it. Yes, like Google
I've
Colab.
actually been using Kaggle. Yeah, you can use their GPU.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that as well.
Mm.
Yay! Can we appreciate Lillian one more time, guys? Yeah, and yeah, she'll share this file with us, the notebook, and then our team, WIDS team, will share it with all of you. I think at this point, we'll close the session, and yeah, first, I mean, once again, thank you very much for making it. Yeah, I mean, if you were here previously, in the first workshop, it was all full, but people are in other engagements. So thank you for, setting aside other engagements just to be here with us in person. We truly appreciate it, and I hope you've learned a lot. And especially if you're participating in the Datathon, I believe you got something, right? From, from Daktari, just sharing insights about the topic, and yeah, and now Lillian with the notebook. I think it's really great. We'll share, and if you have questions, please just keep them, or you ask them now. I think we are all good now, but I'm sure when you go back, sit down again with this data, you'll have some questions. We have the third workshop, and we will use that to explore these questions more. So it's in 2 weeks. Again, you are welcome. If you are joining us online and you'd like to come in person in the next workshop in 2 weeks, please let us know via the email. Otherwise, I think we closed that form. Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody, including those of us online. I hope this session was helpful for you. We will close it at this point. Will you send us the data set as well? Okay, so the data set is on Kaggle. I wonder if you are registered on Kaggle. So the question was from, can you send us the data set as well? Stella, I wonder if you, because we are here preparing for the Datathon challenge hosted on Kaggle. Have you registered for WiDS Datathon challenge? Yes, then the dataset is on Kaggle. Please let us know if you have access to it. If you don't, then thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Jennifer, for sharing that. Oh, nice. Yes, she started. Do we have access to the data? All of us here? I believe so. All right. Thank you. Thanks everybody for joining. Thank you, Jennifer Mukami, for answering all questions on the chat. Yeah. I think we'll end this call at this point. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
So guys, let us just talk and mingle and we can drink some water behind here. Thank you for coming in.